Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another House of Bricks Live. It's been a while, but we're back and we're building. So very excited about today's guests. A lot of CEOs, founders, and operators. They're not struggling because they can't handle pressure. It's because they've built their entire careers on handling pressure. But what I've seen and experienced firsthand after being an entrepreneur for 30 years is that pressure never actually shuts off. You go from one decision to the next, one problem to the next, one responsibility to the next, and over time, something starts to slip. Not because you're not capable, but because your system never gets a reset. So you stay on all the time. And I can attest to this. I've lived it way too much. And the person that sacrifices the most is you. And eventually that shows up in your clarity, your energy, your relationships, and your performance. And that's what we're going to talk to you about today. Alyssa Spaw. So we got connected through Vistage Worldwide, great organization. And it's a tough crowd. You walk in there, you have high-level CEOs, and you got about 2 or 3 minutes to capture their attention. And from the outset, Alyssa demonstrated her knowledge and also was able to engage a very tough crowd. So Alyssa is an adaptive performance advisor.
Adam, you have to leave your video wasn't working. Is it now? Okay. Go ahead.
And what happened? Are we good? All right, we're back. My video wasn't working. So, but Alyssa is an adaptive performance advisor who works with high-performing professionals and executives, people who are succeeding in business, but whose health systems start to break down under pressure in the real life. So, Alyssa, I'd like to welcome you to the House of Bricks Live.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and to chat a little bit about this, especially coming from someone who has a lot of experience in this space. I think this is an important message. So I'm honored to be here.
Well, thank you. And adding to the pressure, right? My camera doesn't even work and I didn't know it. So I'm just babbling and no one can see me. But now hopefully that's working and we'll just go ahead and adjust under that pressure, right? So before we get into your work, I want to start where we always do, which is our test, fail, learn, grow. And what we just learned is I need to make sure my camera's working before I start talking. But what's a failure that stands out for you? Something that didn't go the way you expected, but ended up shaping where you are today?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think one thing that always stands out to me is it's almost like the weird interview question where it's not really a weakness, it's not really a strength, but it was competitive bodybuilding for me. It was something that I had connected with pretty early on in my career, and it did go very well in many ways. But over time, I found out that it was quite an extreme. And I think this relates to a lot of the rooms that I'm in. We kind of get into this all or nothing mentality. And I found myself in a position where I was not only physically out of balance, but really emotionally out of balance, really just trying to juggle all of those pillars at once. And when friends or family members started coming to me and started asking me, hey, you look so fit, you look so healthy, what's your secret? I had to be genuinely honest with them and share with them that this was something that was not going to make them necessarily healthier, but it was something that was very competitive. It was something that was a challenge. And so in that, it was something that I found a lot of inspiration through because I was able to grow and understand it. But it's what shaped the message today, something that feels a lot more actionable, something that feels a lot more sustainable and manageable and realistic in everyday life, especially when you have a lot of other things going on. Taking those lessons that I learned along the way from, whether it's the psychology or the neuroscience of becoming an athlete or a competitor, whether it's the nutritional sciences, kind of studying just human eating behavior and being a personal trainer, really trying to shape something that people could relate better to.
Yeah, and that's no easy task, right? Like bodybuilding at a competitive level. I mean, being an athlete and, understanding what goes into that. There had to be something you thought you would get out of it and what you really got out of it. What did you think you'd get and what did you end up with?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was going through a lot of, I mean, at the time, this was also when fitness influencing was really on the rise. So I think that competing almost felt like it was something that was going to launch this incredible career. I also thought I would get, I guess, maybe more acceptance. And that really goes into, there's a lot of avenues for women, I think, in body image, but essentially I think there was this idea that maybe that if that was something you could be good at, you get accepted. And maybe it's a level of perfection that somebody could obtain. But what I really ended up getting from it, I think, was just a lot more wisdom on how to be more comfortable with myself, and also how to move that into a career where you're able to be confident in what you say, how you think, and inspire other people to do that.
And being a performance advisor, right? You and working with elite CEOs and executives, talking about their health, you get to see behind the curtain a little bit, right? We all get on social media with our best, and we're CEOs, we're leading this company and have great titles and everything that goes with that. But on the inside, they're wearing themselves, basically to death, right? Wearing themselves out. So they're leading everyone around them, but the self leadership part of being able to take care of themselves, what do you think is the biggest obstacle for leaders to do that?
To take care of themselves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's because there's a lot of pressure as a leader. You're not only responsible for your actions, but you're also responsible for how those actions begin to impact other people. And I think that really gets in the way of them recognizing that by repairing their system or getting their system to work more optimally, that's going to allow them to be able to show up better as a leader. It also creates more of a modeling type of system where other people, maybe they want to know what your secrets are or how you're actually able to optimize that. But I think the major barrier is just you think that you really need to put everything into the business in order for it to be successful. But it's also, if you are part of that business, putting more into you so that you have the ability to give back in those moments, whether it's the sprint or it's the pull away, so that you have the energy to sprint when you get there. It's that balancing act that I think they need to play, rather than just feeling like, oh, if I keep pushing in my career, it's going to continue building the company. But it's also building yourself.
Absolutely. And so the idea was, hey, I'm going to be a bodybuilder. You did it. You competed. Was there one point of failure you felt in that stood out the most, or that you would view as a failure?
Yeah. And what it really was is I thought I was going to compete a second time. And I had begun the prep. I had hired a coach and I was going through it. And I remember this was when I was still in graduate school, and I made this incredible trip across the world to Australia. And I thought I was going to be prepping during the entire thing. And I think there was something about being out somewhere new, but also shifting mindsets and being around different people, being around new experiences, that all of a sudden I recognized that there was a lot more to life than just competing. And I felt awful at the time telling my coach, because I said, this is something that was really requiring a lot of discipline. And I thought I could just push myself through it, but mentally I wasn't in the space to be able to do that. And while at the time I really viewed that as something that maybe showed weakness, I felt like being honest with myself and giving myself that opportunity to step away and do what actually felt right in the moment was probably the biggest lesson in it.
Yeah, and that would be the learning component, right? Like the only expectations you can ever live up to are the ones you set for yourself. You will never meet other people's expectations. I heard someone say that the other day, super high performer, and people are asking him like, hey, what expectations do you set for your kids? And his answer was, whatever expectations they set for themselves. Like that, those are the only ones in life that you can live up to. And it sounds like that was part of your growth of that as well, the testing, failing, learning. But out of that entire experience, how do you think that helped you grow into what you're doing today?
Yeah, I think I got a lot more comfortable with my intuition when following things that felt like, maybe at the time it seemed like a big decision. It seemed like something that could create a lot of chaos in my life in many ways, because you are completely pivoting into something new or something unknown. So I guess at the end of the day, that's really what I got from it.
That is a great takeaway for sure. And so just as we're kind of, transitioning, I've gotten to know you a little bit over the last, couple months, and how you view things and speak to leaders. And, we've talked about stress being a constant cycle. So you open with this idea that, high performers, stress is not an event, but it's a continuous cycle. So what are you seeing in the leaders you work with that made you frame it that way?
Absolutely. I think one thing that's important also to recognize is that I think maybe with any business, there is this level of higher seasons and lower seasons. There are higher pressure seasons, maybe lower pressure seasons, but for somebody that's in a high level position, they're the ones that are under the pressure to be preparing for all of the things that are potentially not happening now, but could be happening. And they're not responsible for just themselves. They're also responsible for all of the other people that are going to be working with them. And you can't just shut that off, because things are constantly changing, and they have to have this top-down perspective so that they can pivot in the moment if that's important. And in order to better the company as a whole, they have to be multiple steps ahead. And that's even in the distinction to say, okay, well, if there are higher and lower seasons, during the lower seasons, there's still some kind of pressure, because you have to prepare for that next high season. How do we do it better? Or how do we perform better? Or how do we use these systems and processes to guide us through that and ultimately grow as a result? And I think that's really what I see in a lot of those rooms, is they're bouncing back and forth between those different types of pressure, but it never stops.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And what you said earlier just kind of set me down a rabbit trail in my mind. But it's one of I would call it a blessing and a curse of my DNA, which is not adhering or conforming to whatever season I'm in. So what you said, recognizing the season you're in, you can't, harvest in the winter, right? And that's one of the ways you can protect yourself is hey, what season am I in personally, and what season is the business in, and being able to conform yourself to that actual season. Because as a visionary, you're always hey, today's the best day, it's going to happen. But if you can recognize hey, this may be a winter season, or I may need to focus on myself more, it can reduce the collateral damage for sure. So what do you see as for the executives out there listening now, what are some early signs that you may be entering into this cycle?
Probably one of the most common ones that I see in rooms is this restlessness in the middle of the night, or maybe lack of quality of the sleep that they're getting. They're tending to go to sleep, but they're not fully waking up feeling recovered, because their body is living in this state of slightly elevated cortisol. And part of the reason for that would be cortisol is one of the chemical cascades that allows us to be awake and alert in the morning. It's supposed to peak early, but it starts to almost then go down, come back up when people have more stress throughout the course of the day, which means it's peaking a little bit early. And that's the 2 to 4 a.m. or so wake up call, the restlessness, the mind begins to race, and it's hard to shut that off. And if your sleep is not happening optimally, if it's not high quality sleep, you're going to experience a lot more brain fog. You're going to probably, as a result, notice that decision making takes a little bit more time than it had before. You're not just quick on your feet. Maybe things take a little bit more. It may be even emotional reactivity. If you're having conversations and you're feeling that agitation, and as a result, I think that overall that agitation or that irritability is a warning sign that some level of that system is feeling overactivated, and there may be some small steps that they need to take to then pull back, give a small reset. And it's not always all of the things that you think. It's just really small steps along the way.
And there's a lot of hype everywhere, social media. People always talk about their morning routines. But what I've learned is the morning routine starts the night before, right? And so can you give us some practical tips of things that we could do? First of all, do you agree with that? And secondly, can you give us some guidance on, things that we can incorporate, a crawl, walk, run options? Because you give people too much, they don't do anything. So what's one thing people can do? And then maybe a couple more if they want to take it to the next level.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot. It's interesting as well, because I was having a conversation with one of my clients yesterday who owns an accounting firm, essentially. And when I was talking to him, he was describing a lot of the other seasons that he's had in his career with the hustle culture, the grind culture. Maybe you stay up a couple hours to get more of that work done, but it always then trickles into the next day. And then you feel like you're compromised the next day. Maybe those things that you could have pushed off, you would have been able to complete the tasks in the same amount of time between the 2 days, but it may then eventually take longer. And the fact that he was able to implement some tools, which I'll get to, he felt that this was a season that he didn't actually burn out. He felt that there was a lot more regulation there, and he felt like he really had to see it to believe it. And I just thought it was such an incredible point that he implemented this very small things. And then all of a sudden he felt that he was able to perform better and the season went more smoothly for him. And some of the things that I'd probably say in general would be to really protect the last 1 to 2 hours or so in the evening, engaging in some kind of more deactivating activities. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy. It doesn't have to be any long form. I know some people hesitate with the concept of meditation, but some powerful resets, doing some mobility, having a nighttime routine that's really giving your body the ability to recognize, hey, it's time to get some rest. It's time to restore. It's time to recover, and being very strategic around your bedtime and your wake up time. Because I think that then if you have that boundary for yourself, you're setting that expectation. That's what's then going to allow you to be able to show up again tomorrow in the capacity that you would want to.
So is it like going to bed at a specific time every night? Like people are very consistent on when they wake up, right? But it can vary significantly when they go to sleep. How important is, setting that nighttime schedule? I feel like we're talking about parenting right now, but it is important. There's a reason mom told you to go to bed at 9 o'clock. So, but how important is that being consistent when you go to bed?
It's funny you also say that, because probably 3 or 4 different clients who are also dads, they have the same comment. Essentially, they're like, oh, well, when we're kids, we have this nighttime routine and everything's guided by the parental structure, of course. But then as we age, we get a bit more rebellious. So we don't feel like we need some kind of nighttime routine, but it is incredibly successful. And the research, as much as I'd love to refute it for anybody, and myself sometimes included, it does show that consistency is key. And that's because the brain likes to know what to expect at appropriate times. And sometimes you can be picking up in various pieces of the cycle if you're consistently shifting your sleep and wake cycles. Meaning if you typically go to bed at 10, but one night you go to bed at midnight, your brain almost starts to pick up where it left off, or where it would typically leave off. And you may be missing out on some of those other things. Not to mention, if we are using things like technology in the evening, it's mostly one, of course, we know that blue light can interrupt the melatonin, which is that chemical signal that allows us to get into those deep restorative levels of sleep. But a lot of them are also exceptionally attention seeking. Even if we are exhausted, it's going to keep our attention longer, maybe even produce some kind of emotional reactivity, because that's part of that addiction to using those things. And then you're finding yourself in a position where that bedtime gets pushed off even later. If there is just one boundary that they could set, I think that if you could be consistent with that, you would be able to show up much more present in every single day, as difficult as it may be at times.
No, I agree. And leaving the phone out of the bedroom is probably one of the toughest things, but that's always a good step too. I mean, if it's next to me on the nightstand, I can like feel it pulling me to pick it up. So it's like, I got to get that thing out of here. So I read one of your.
Anytime it's present, it's dividing your attention.
100%. In one of your articles, we were talking about acute versus chronic stress. Someone throws out like, oh, I'm so stressed out, but you break down kind of the difference between the two. Most people just think like stress is stress, but walk us through the difference between, acute versus chronic stress.
Acute stress is the way stress was designed in nature. This is to say that if there was the tiger or the bear attack, it was that acute response where you had to remove yourself from immediate danger. But eventually, if you made it through, you were on the other side. And there is a lot of research to show that that is part of the completion of the cycle. And of course, the two primary actions there are fleeing or fighting, which are still part of that physiological or that body response to the stress. But now, because we're living in our head, we don't always recognize that the tiger is not real. And there are a lot of other influences and things in our environment that are keeping us in this consistent level of stress. And it's even important, I think, to define what I would consider stress in the modern day, because if we're looking at the chronic stress, I define stress as it's usually my negative reaction to all those outside events, but it's based on my perceived inability to handle them. If I live in a mindset where I feel like I have the inability to handle the things that are going on around me, I get stuck in this hamster wheel. And in order to shift that, I think it's really important to look at stress maybe slightly differently, so that it's not just thinking about something that you handle after the fact, but it's maybe something more that you handle in the moment. And that would bring it more into the idea of presence and taking with what's within your control.
Yeah, and there is a difference between resistance, right, and stress. I mean, your experience in bodybuilding, you go to the gym, you break down your muscles, they grow, but it's the same thing. Like overtraining has a negative effect. Too much stress or pressure has a negative effect. But is there a point where I could be, or listeners could be, more self-aware of when resistance is turning into stress, or where that pressure is doing more harm than good?
I think a lot of the warning signs in my presentations, I do refer to these as your check engine lights, these little indicators that the system is slightly out of balance. I would say if you don't know your check engine lights, ask somebody very close to you, whether it's a business partner, a friend, a spouse, a family member, somebody at your organization, because they can typically tell you what that looks like. And I think that when you're starting to go past that point where it's not just resistance, it's not just that small amount of stress, people maybe stop showing up. Maybe they begin to isolate themselves and they recognize that they're not going out and doing the things that they enjoy anymore, or they feel like if they want something done right, maybe they have to do it themselves. Maybe it's someone sitting across the table from you and saying, hey, I know you're actually here, but I feel like emotionally you're somewhere else right now. It could be even distracting techniques where your body almost starts to fight back and it doesn't necessarily want to dive immediately into the issues. So we distract ourselves with other things like scrolling or other activities that aren't related to the problem. That emotional reactivity, again, I think is another thing that it's indicating the scale is beginning to tip. If you're not feeling like you're not able to be able to have that conversation without that reactivity. And then at the end of it, maybe it's, reaching for the drink, or it's reaching for something that is just maybe going to take the edge off for a moment. And our body sends those signals. I think that a lot of people get good at ignoring them.
Yeah. And as a leader, as a CEO, right, you mentioned spouse, family members, they can obviously point things out, but it's your team may recognize it as well, but you're the leader. You're supposed to have it all together. They may not even say anything, but that's the face we have to put on. And we may pay attention or notice those things, but we still got a job to do, right? How many times have you said that? You're like, hey, I still got a job to do, and not taking that time to focus on yourself. So we've talked about acute versus chronic stress and some of those impacts, but you talk about things like brain fog, slower decision making, emotional reactivity. CEOs love numbers, they love revenue, they love impact. What is the cost of that chronic stress and the impact on decision making?
I think it's an accumulative cost in the sense that if somebody is consistently feeling like it's taking them longer to make decisions, then ultimately the company is going to be at a much weaker point overall. I think that if we're looking at the day-to-day activity, it would be a lot more cost effective probably to make little tiny investments in the reset of the system, whether that be through movement or some kind of mental reset in there. Because I think that it then trickles down and we have an organization that just feels like it's very divided. It feels very split. One thing that I also heard the other day too is I think that it's really powerful for a leader to say that maybe they do need help in some way. And it also allows other people within the company to say that at various points of pressure, they can also reach out for help or work together or delegate and bring the organization to a higher level. But I think the biggest cost is you're really losing the connection with your team, and you're losing the ability to really lead through some level of example if you're not also managing those things on a daily basis.
Yeah, and again, as a leader, right, it's very difficult to unplug, but you have to think, how can I perform at my highest level? I know there's things like I've stayed up late at night working on that I could have easily completed in the morning, but I just wanted them off my list. And I probably didn't do them at the level I would have if it would have been the first thing I did in the morning. So some of that self-discipline of like letting tomorrow worry about itself is always a good mindset to have. And moving on, love talking about this part is you talk about the grit trap. Okay. So during COVID, I got sucked into David Goggins' world. If you know him or heard of him, most people have, but I was like, just decided one day I was going to walk a marathon. So I walked 26 miles for no reason at all other than to kill time and not be on Zoom. And all of that has its place. But what is the grit trap?
Yeah, I a lot of times it's someone feels like if they just try harder, if they just push harder, that all of these things are going to happen. But the system is adaptive, however, exceptionally delicate. A lot of leaders want to use that logic and reasoning. They want to talk to themselves about, okay, why am I not doing this? How do I make this happen? Because that's the strategy that they probably use within their business on a regular basis. Ideally, though, this is something that needs to be regulated through the physical body. It's not going to be something that is accomplished through self-criticism, or at the end, I think that someone like David Goggins, for example, they have this very extreme mentality. It's either you're there or you're not there. Instead, I think that this is an opportunity for people to understand that you have to dump those hormones, and probably by living in a state of constant push or just being hard on yourself or criticizing yourself for the things that aren't happening, your body is living in that stress cycle. And that's where we have to get out of the mind and probably into the physical body instead.
And so how do high performers break that pattern? Because part of that is like and that's what made me hesitate. Part of that is like what makes them great, right? Is the never off button. But eventually that candle burns out. What are some things that we can do to kind of break those patterns?
I like to call things checkpoints, whether it's a daily checkpoint, a weekly checkpoint, a monthly checkpoint. There are some non-negotiables. These look very different depending on the season of work that you're in. But for example, if I'm traveling, everything is completely out of whack. My sleep is not there. For some reason, I have a delay. I don't have the ability to get to the gym. Most of those things are part of my stress regulation. But maybe it's just me saying I'm going to get a glass of water. And I say non-negotiables in the context of, I think that there are very small things that you can keep in as those non-negotiables. But also, if you were to then go and map out, if all of these pillars, right, talking about the pillars of health, which are things like stress and sleep, but also hydration. We talk about nutrition, we talk about exercise. If those were all going ideally, what do they look like? What are the things that I would like to be happening? And there will be a season where a lot of those things are in order, but there are seasons when those things are out of order. And therefore, having a checkpoint, I think it gives you a moment to step back and say, these were all happening when X, Y, Z was in alignment. But now that things are shifting, I'm noticing that these behaviors are no longer a priority. What would need to change in order to do that? And that's where, again, it is thinking through the things that would be optimal or where you feel your best. And in order to break the cycle, you have to have some level of maybe external influence to create that as a habit, to say, how do I get back and how do I get closer to those things when I felt more regulated?
Yeah, it is a tough pattern. And again, it's simple, but it's not easy. Like we all know these things, but actually being able to implement them. But like you said, just deciding to do something and doing it, simple as like, hey, I'm going to get up and get a glass of water from my desk, every hour or something, to just get moving. And I remember, from your workshop and in your article, this was probably one of the biggest unlocks, for me, or reminders, because I know this, but how important movement is. And shortly after your workshop, I started to implement some things into my routine of just getting me moving in the morning. And I'm not talking about going to the gym. I was already going to the gym, but started doing, and it's funny, my sons were laughing at me, but like some Tai Chi, like movement, like just getting, ready. My son was like, dude, what are you doing? But just getting up and making that movement, it definitely helps get your brain moving. But you say that, movement completes the stress cycle. So most people think of movement as fitness, not regulation. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Absolutely. One thing that's important to recognize is that anytime our body perceives a level of threat or in the environment, any kind of attack, you release a lot of these hormones that are associated with stress. In my workshop, I typically talk about the cascade between things like adrenaline and cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, how it's directly related to our release of blood sugar. Regardless of what you've eaten, your body's preparing to run from the tiger or the bear. And you're also then probably overloading the beta cells in the pancreas that secrete the insulin, telling the body to pull all of those things back in. And if all of these hormones are floating around, we're not getting rid of them the way that nature truly intended, because the missing piece in the equation, we have the fight or flight, but we also many times, I think, when we're dealing with those consistent and continuous cycles, we get into the freeze response. And the freeze looks a little bit different for everyone, but this just generally means that these hormones are floating around, and all of these hormones, they're stopping you from being able to impact the logical and the rational side of the brain. Therefore, again, kind of mentioning this concept of trying to get out of the head, but getting into the body so that you're moving these hormones around more frequently. And it doesn't have to be any super intense exercise every day. It literally could just be going for some kind of brisk walk and allowing your body to dissipate these and give you more access to the logical, realistic, and problem-solving side of the brain.
So imagine, well, I don't have to imagine, I am a CEO, but for the CEOs listening out there, all right, so I've been on 5 Zoom calls today. I've got 2 more coming up. Like, how do I put this into practice? Because, it is tough to be on video and moving. What's one thing I can do to put this into practice?
One thing that I teach in all of my workshops is, one, I know it's really hard to be in this modern world where a lot of things are virtual, where it feels like we always have to be on video. And I think there's a lot of benefit to being on video because you get that personal interaction with someone rather than maybe just a phone call. But if it's also in the working environment where you are present in an office and you have the opportunity to, I tell people to do walk and talks, or maybe you could call it a moving meeting, and get up and have conversations as you're moving. You're also building that into the culture and the community of the workplace, helping other people understand why movement is important. Sometimes it's maybe just doing 5 bodyweight squats in between some Zoom sessions that you have throughout there. I'm a big advocate of saying they shouldn't necessarily be back to back. I think things should probably be more with a 5-minute buffer or something, where at least you have that moment where you can get up, you can sit down. There's some interesting research as well around calf raises. So if you're sitting at your desk and you're doing calf raises, so you're bringing if your feet were on the floor, flat on the floor, you'd be lifting up onto the balls of your feet. And just doing some calf raises actually helps with blood flow circulation. This is also a travel hack if you're stuck in a plane in a middle seat or a window seat, keeping that blood flowing, and that can generally help with cognition. And of course, I could go into other things that maybe you're dealing with. There's different types of training that I'd probably recommend for different feelings, but I didn't want to go on too long for you.
No, that's fine. And I was very tempted to start doing some calf raises while you were talking.
I'm literally
if I did those on Zoom, the whole time I was on Zoom, I probably would have to wear shorts all the time.
I know, you got to show those off if you're working hard.
All right. So, the human body is very complex. There's a million different philosophies out there of diet, sleep, exercise, all of those things. What I liked about your workshop is it really made it simple. It wasn't very divisive. Some people are vegan, some people eat paleo, CrossFit, yoga, whatever. It kind of made it personal, like what felt right to me, but also gave me some guidance in practical things that I could do. And what I liked about or appreciate about your advisory is it's more system based and not a workout plan. Like you can have the best diet in the world, but if you're not sleeping right or working out, like it all has to work together. You make a distinction between a rigid workout plan versus having a system that adapts to you. Like workouts that I maybe did 10 years ago as an athlete may not be applicable right now, or it may not be the right time for that. That's really a big shift for people to make, because we are creatures of habit. We go to the gym, kind of do the same things over and over again and wonder why we don't get results. But what does a movement system that's really going to hold under pressure actually look like?
For many of my clients, I will have a guiding structure or a skeleton of a program, depending on the types of goals that they're trying to achieve. But generally, the reason why it's important to also have conversations week to week is if somebody is in a position where they're traveling a lot, maybe they do have busier weeks than others. I know a lot of Vistage chairs, they pack their one-to-ones into a couple of weeks throughout the month. And then some other weeks they're maybe adapting or working on the business in different ways. So those sprints versus those pullbacks, this is the system that's then going to adapt to it. While there is the skeleton, it's okay. I know you're going to a work conference next week. Does the conference center have a gym? All right. So some of the exercises that we're doing right now, those probably aren't going to work in that gym. Maybe they just have dumbbells. Maybe they just have cardio equipment. Maybe we're just going to focus on some mobility this week, getting you reset. Maybe we're just going to focus on body weight movements, a couple of things that you can do really quickly. Maybe a random body weight, high intensity interval workout, something where they're not necessarily being required to commit a lot of time. If somebody's used to going to the gym 3 to 4 days a week for an hour, but then all of a sudden their only time available is 20 minutes, we can make that 20 minutes incredibly effective just by adapting the system, the training mechanisms that we're utilizing. And it, I guess, takes us away from feeling like we have to adhere perfectly to a plan. In nature, there wasn't a perfect plan. Nature was going to do what it did on whatever given day. We could probably have all the best intentions in the world, but one day we would have to climb and we would have to forage another day. One day we would have to hunt, or we would have to do things that we're probably throwing our body out. And that's why I think it's good to have a routine because that builds the habit, that builds the consistency, but it's also good to have the level of flexibility to know that your body is still getting something really positive from the experience, no matter how you move. And it can create a more well-rounded lifestyle in general, because then you're better able to not only think, but also move in a greater capacity when you have a lot of these adaptive strategies in your programs.
Yeah, and the key word there is adaptive, right? We're not in a controlled environment. We're on planes, we're in hotels, the gyms are different. Maybe our meal options are different. And that's why, same thing in business, why I tell everyone you need an advisor, whether it's me or anyone else. Like, we all need accountability. We need someone to hold us to what we commit to, but then also you're giving them guidance to work within the constraints that they have. It's the same in business, right? It's what's available to me and how can I get the best results of that time. And you mentioned people going to the gym for an hour. I see people there, and if you're that guy that sits on the machine and starts texting and, posting pictures of yourself, like, we're not going to be friends. But that 20-minute routine that you give people, honestly, is probably more effective than the hour that they spend in there on their own. And as CEOs, executives, our time is our most valuable resource. So why not invest in making that time the most optimal as possible? So we've talked about a lot today.
Yes.
What's kind of the big picture takeaway when people interact with you, hear your workshops, become an advisory client for you? What's one big takeaway you want them to get out of this session today?
Based on the focus of what we've talked about, I think it's important to recognize that stress is a part of the system, but it is not designed to be the entire system. When we define it as the acute stress versus the chronic stress, the consistent and continuous cycle, we need to find a way to then really resolve that. And I think if you are operating under some level of constant pressure, it's not just trying to clear your mind or rely on your self-criticism or rely on that push or that grit to get you through. We eventually just really need to complete that cycle. And maybe if it's one of those days where you're feeling agitated, you could try something like high intensity interval training. Maybe it's a day where you're hoping to create a little bit more metabolic stability. Maybe you haven't really had the opportunity to move for a while. It could be something that you're leaning into for strength, or if you have other goals within that, if you want to be able to go about your daily activities. If you're on flights, maybe you want to reset your circadian rhythms. That movement pattern could look more like just getting out and going for a walk in the sunlight to help you reset. Back-to-back meetings for multiple days. If you're running on a conference, this is something that can also help break the cycle. Maybe mobility, slow-paced training sessions can help you. And understanding that it's not about doing these things perfectly, but just finding in the moment how to adapt, how to shift, how to complete that cycle of stress so that you can access and improve your nervous system, improve your stress hormones and the release of those, and additionally improve the cognitive functioning and allowing you to have more access to be a powerful leader.
Well, this has been extremely impactful, but also practical. And when I say practical, please don't be the person practicing yoga in the airport on the concourse. But, I've seen some crazy things. So there's ways to do this and still be considered normal. So again, that's why I appreciate your workshop. It was simple, but still within the realm of being normal is the only thing I can think of. So, but I appreciate you coming on today. And if people want to learn more about you, how can they connect with you?
LinkedIn is probably the best option right now. We're gearing up to launch the full website, which will be alyssaspaw.com if you're interested. And moving forward, there are multiple tiers, multiple options for working with me, whether it's something that you want to work within your organization and bring more health and wellness into that equation for your employees to help them understand the how and the why and not just the what behind the story of what it is that they're doing. if you're interested in getting more of that accountability, having some guidance on performance so that you feel like you can adapt to that day-to-day routine, we have coaching programs available for that. So it's kind of just coming down to what feels the most natural. Where are you in that process? Is it starting with the individual and then building into the company, or is it something that you're passionate about on your own and potentially even want to consider ways to improve that?
I appreciate that. Yeah, definitely connect with Alyssa on LinkedIn. And listen, if you're, a founder, executive, operator, I know her system works. She does over 80 Vistage workshops a year. So again, those are tough environments with high performing individuals. And she did a great job in capturing the room, but also giving us practical ways to implement it. I've got a couple going. My new one is going to be the calf raises. So we'll see where I'm at by August and how that goes. But Alyssa, I appreciate you being a guest on House of Bricks Live. And for everyone watching, we're going to put Alyssa's links in the show so you can connect with her and stay connected. So appreciate everybody. And we'll see you next week.
Amazing. Thank you so much again, Adam. It was great seeing you.
Great to see you as well.